You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai. I'm really honored to be in conversation with U.S. Senator Chris Murphy, representing the people of Connecticut. He was previously a member of the House of Representatives and the Connecticut State Legislature. And he's really been known for his work and, might I add, respected for his work to combat gun violence, political corruption, and the scourge of loneliness right here in America. He has a new book out called Crisis of the Common Good. Joining us right here for his More Perfect Union debut, Senator Chris Murphy.
Yeah, honored to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, honored to have you here. First things first, Senator Murphy, I know you serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. There's so much afoot around the world with U.S. involvement. I just came back from Cuba. I was on a U.S. Fact-finding mission with an emergency delegation that was put together by the folks over at IBW, among other civil society groups. And I saw firsthand the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding on the ground in Cuba, where we're seeing folks who need something as basic as an inhaler. Inhalers for folks who are asthmatic are becoming harder to come by. The healthcare system's been severely impacted. Talk to us about what you're hearing right now and what we as everyday Americans can do to raise consciousness about what's happening in Cuba in our name.
Well, I mean, listen, it's a stain on our reputation and power around the world when we intentionally hurt civilians in order to try to effectuate national security objectives. The reality is our Cuba policy has not worked for 75 years. This policy of isolation, this policy of intentionally trying to bring pain to the Cuban people. This all feels like a pretext to a military campaign in Cuba, which would be a disaster, maybe not as big a disaster as Iran, but a humanitarian disaster, a strategic disaster, and a moral disaster. I mean, I just don't understand why the Republicans that are in charge of Congress right now have outsourced all foreign policy to the president. He does not get to use sanctions power without the consent of Congress. He doesn't get to send our men and women to war without the consent of Congress. And we are living in an increasingly imperial presidency where the president is intentionally hurting people all around the world for sport. And that's a sad state for America to be in, because the reputational damage that will be done to us is going to last for a generation.
It'll last for a generation, not just here in the United States, but a generation abroad. I want to ask you about just something that really struck me while on the ground in Cuba. We had a chance to meet with the Cuban president and the Cuban deputy foreign minister. And one of the things that the Cuban president said that really stood out to me, he referred to American policy as sort of like white supremacist and genocidal. Those are actually the words that he used. And he said that what Iran, Venezuela, and now Cuba have in common is that this alleged threat that they pose to the United States is based on a lie. What do you think of that characterization by the Cuban president?
Well, I think that it's not the same story from Iran to Cuba to Venezuela. So, I mean, take the example of Iran. It is not a lie that Iran presents a threat to the United States and our interests. I mean, Iran has legitimately tried to assassinate American leaders, but there is no evidence that they were planning any attack on the United States. In Venezuela and Cuba's case, there's absolutely no evidence that they pose any territorial threat to the United States. I mean, this is driven in the hemisphere by an agenda from folks who have fled both of those countries, who have a personal reason, Marco Rubio and others who surround him, to try to engage in regime change. But they run up against Donald Trump, who has no interest in regime change. He's just interested in corruption. So what happened in Venezuela? We invaded Venezuela. We took out their leader. Maybe Marco Rubio thought that was going to result in regime change, but it just resulted in corruption. All that happened was that the United States and Trump's oil companies' friends took control of the oil. So the Venezuelan people are not any better. In fact, this regime is probably worse in some ways than Maduro's regime. And a whole bunch of Trump's friends are getting rich. And if we're to do a similar action in Cuba, I think the results will be the same. The Cuban people won't be any better. They'll probably be less well off, but there will be a bunch of palms that'll get greased of those that are close to the president. Corruption is the underlying story. So yes, it is a lie that any of these three countries posed a territorial threat to the United States. Why we are engaged in these wars is much more likely a story of corruption.
Senator Murphy, now onto your book, which really shines a light on the crisis of the common good. That's what it's called. I really like how in this book, you get back to America's communitarian roots. And you make the argument in this book that this is recoverable, that in fact, it's necessary, that the only way that we really get to the other side of this, if we let history be our guide, is in community.
Yeah, Trump is certainly the main character today in our political conversation, and he deserves to be. He's ruining this country and the world. But I think everybody out there knows that there was something rotten in this country before Trump ever declared his candidacy, and that is this country has been spiritually unspooling. And I don't mean that as a question of religiosity. I mean that we are less connected to our neighbors. We are more focused on our own individual achievement than on the health of our communities. We're lonelier today. We wake up every day with less access to meaning and purpose in our work life and in our community life. There is a crisis of the common good. And when people are feeling bad, when they wake up not knowing what they exist for, when they wake up feeling lonely, they are drawn to demagogues like Donald Trump, who scapegoat people, who say, your anxiety, your loneliness, well, that's the fault of immigrants or of Muslims or of gay kids. And so what I'm saying in this book is that we've got work to do to rebuild an economy so that we have a common good capitalism, so that work has dignity, so that the only thing in our economy that matters is not just profit. We've got to build healthier communities with institutions from labor unions to churches that have their doors open more often. We've got to regulate these technologies that are spinning us into lives of isolation. And what I say is that work is not as politically hot as when we fight on war overseas or immigration or guns. That actually a lot of people on the right and the left want healthier, more connected communities. They want the technologies regulated. They're sick of this cold, profit-obsessed capitalism. So this book is about the work we have to do that's not about beating Donald Trump. And I think it's just as important to build a culture of the common good as it is to win elections.
Senator Murphy, you just mentioned common good capitalism. I'm sure there are some of our leaders, learners, and listeners that are tapped in that are like, what's that? Isn't that an oxymoron considering the political corruption and the growth of the oligarchy class here in the United States and abroad? Talk to us about, what do you mean by common good capitalism? What is that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's certainly a lot of folks who have given up on capitalism and believe that we have to live in a socialist democracy. I think that there is a way. In fact, I think I know there's a way by looking at other countries and how they've designed their markets that we can be better and different. And I'll give you some clear ideas. I mean, first of all, you just should have a much higher social floor. We should have a minimum wage that's a living wage, $25 an hour. We should have paid family and medical leave in this country. Retirement should actually allow you to live in a dignified way. We should break up concentrated corporate power. We should have power be local, right? The owner of your hospital, your supermarket should live in your community. That's a choice to allow power to get so concentrated. We should structure governance of companies so that profit isn't the only thing that matters. Put workers and community members on governance boards for corporations. There is a way to build a version of capitalism that cares about something other than profit, that has incentive systems to invest in the community, that does not run workers into the ground. That, I think, is what a lot of people on the left and the right want. Now, you also have to fix our democracy, because the corruption of our economy is downstream of the corruption of our democracy. That means big changes, a constitutional amendment to get billionaire corporate anonymous money out of our politics. I'm not saying any of this is easy, but I do believe that there is a different way for our culture and our economy to operate so that you have more opportunities to engage in efforts of common purpose with your neighbors rather than seeing your neighbors as competitors, because all that's been left for us is the scraps when the folks at the top are taking everything.
Not alone in that assessment in this book. In fact, you write about how there's a hidden bipartisan majority for change. Polling shows that 88%, this polling that you've compiled for this book, 88% of voters support banning insurance companies from denying doctor recommended treatments. 84% want to stop private equity from buying up single family housing. We know it's a major issue, particularly here in California, where I'm broadcasting today. 78% support breaking up big tech. Your point is that the consensus exists. It just hasn't been harnessed yet. Let me ask you, Senator Murphy, what is it that Senate Democrats, your colleagues, are willing to go to the mat for? Should you all win control of the Senate? Should Democrats take control of the House? The people want to know, what are Democrats going to go to the mat for and potentially shut down government in order to achieve?
Well, I mean, I hinted at what I think should be our first agenda, which is unrigging our democracy. I mean, people think that we're insincere when we go after Trump's corruption because they know the whole system is corrupt, and they're right about that. So if we win power, yeah, we got to hold Trump accountable. Some people are probably going to go to jail. But we also have to get all of this big corporate money that is often flowed to Democrats out of our politics. We need to pass things like the Stock Act, which ban everybody in Congress from, being able to trade on insider information. And then we have to go big on economic reform. Again, people are just sick of incrementalism, right? It's not like bulk negotiation to lower the price of 10 really expensive drugs. No, it's capping the cost of every prescription drug, limiting profits for the drug companies. As I said, it's a $25 minimum wage, not a $15 minimum wage. We got to go big and be caught failing. I mean, if we don't get all of it, at least we're trying to do the things that are actually going to be making a difference in people's lives. On the question of tactics, I have been arguing for the Democrats to draw a firmer line and just say, listen, we're not willing to fund an immoral, corrupt government. And until you clean up the corruption, then you're not going to get Democratic votes to fund, for instance, the Department of Justice that is normalizing Trump stealing from us. And I think that we'll be in a stronger position to draw that line if we're in power.
Do you think the Senate Majority Leaders align with you on that?
Senate
Minority Leader Chuck Schumer?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think he's got a very hard job, but I haven't been shy of being critical. Obviously, there have been moments where we have decided to reopen the federal government when the corruption is still going on. Those have been decisions that I've disagreed with. Part of the reason I've gotten involved in Democratic primaries this year for the Senate is that, it's not just leadership. It's about getting more people elected into the Senate Democratic caucus who are going to be a little bit less risk averse in the tactics we take.
We know that right here in California, all eyes are on the governor's race. All eyes are on the LA mayor's race. Have you endorsed in any of these races? I know you'll be here in California later this week for a book event with my colleague Alex Michelson on June 6th, where folks can still go to get tickets to that event. But before you get here, we got a big election. We got some work to do still. Have you weighed in on this race?
No, I haven't. As I said, I sort of weigh in on races where I have a really firm understanding of the big difference. I want candidates who see the world through a worker power versus corporate power lens, who are going to take on corruption. I have not endorsed in California. What I have done in California, the thing I have endorsed in California is the billionaires tax. And so I came out a couple of months ago and campaigned with the folks who are organizing. I think that if it passes in California, is going to be a game changer nationally. There's, only one route to be able to adequately fund what people are missing in their healthcare system and their school system, and that is to demand that the people who have become fabulously, disgustingly rich off of this economy pay their fair share. So I think that measure is something that I'll be talking a lot about when I'm out in California this weekend.
Well, and we can't wait to see you here in California later this weekend. Senator Murphy, in our remaining minutes with you, I just want to point out that the Congressional Black Caucus is making some noise, making some demands, particularly of corporations that back in 2021 were fans of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, where we remember a time when voting rights was not considered a partisan issue. It was nonpartisan. And now a lot of these folks have been silent in the wake of the Supreme Court's gutting of the Voting Rights Act and the redrawing of lines in Louisiana and Tennessee, among other southern states. You have not minced words with corporate America in terms of encouraging them to stand up and to be more aggressive at rooting out corruption and their enabling of it. Have you been in touch with your colleagues that are members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and what say you to the folks that say, well, this isn't just a CBC issue. All members of Congress, all members of the Senate should be speaking out about this and encouraging corporations to be clear about where they stand. What's your response to that?
Well, I couldn't agree more. Of course, it's all of our obligation. What's happening across this country as our civil rights laws are being gutted and Republicans are essentially in the process of exterminating Black representation in Congress in this country is a moral abomination. And it is not okay for corporations to sit on the sidelines. It's not okay for institutions to sit on the sidelines. Frankly, when my corporate CEOs, and I've got a lot of them in Connecticut, come into my office, this is the conversation we have, that you have an obligation to more than just your bottom line. You have an obligation as leaders in this country to uphold basic moral tenets. That's what this book is, frankly, about. It's about rebuilding an economy so that CEOs are not directed to only care about the profit, that they actually have an incentive system to care about more than that. I think we've got to step up and use all sorts of innovative tactics in this civil rights crisis moment. That includes putting pressure on corporations. But I saw the NAACP about a week ago talking about launching an effort to say to athletes in this country who care about civil rights that maybe you should go to schools in states that aren't trying to erase Black representation. I think that's a really creative way to do this. I'm all in for all of these tactics because unfortunately, these companies and these states, they're going to have to feel some economic and monetary pain in order to do the right thing, because clearly they're not willing to do it just based upon the moral cost of violating people's civil rights.
Should Democrats be more vocal on this? I know there's been some criticism on these internet streets about some certain high-profile Democrats in the Senate, like Senator Sanders, who has obviously captured the attention of a generation of progressive Democrats. A lot of folks saying the Democrats not saying enough in this moment of crisis.
I can't comment on that specific dialogue. I'm not plugged into it, but I guess I'm just simply agreeing with you that this has got to be a red alert moment for all of us in the Senate, and we've got to be in league. We've got to be in coordination with all of our friends from the CBC to the NAACP to the legal efforts that are trying to push back on this campaign of destruction of Black power and Black representation. So I just agree that we've got to be all in.
Senator Murphy, on this show, More Perfect Union, I end every show reminding folks to do what you can from where you are with what you have. And that seems to be in alignment with the ethos that is a part of this book, Crisis of the Common Good, where you argue that small acts of community matter enormously. As we prepare to come to a close, what's your message, to folks who've given up, who might have lost faith, that those everyday small acts that people make, those everyday small acts of mutual aid collectively are actually big acts?
Yeah, this book talks about this document that we're celebrating 250 years of, which says that government is supposed to care about happiness, right? The pursuit of happiness. And what we know from our personal lives, from data, is that happiness, really doesn't come primarily from an income or a job. It comes from relationships. It comes from participating with your neighbors in efforts to improve your community. So I end this book with a very personal story. I talk about a morning where I was feeling down. It was Thanksgiving morning. My wife and I had just separated. It was the first holiday without my kids with me. And I was feeling bad. I was scrolling through my phone, feeling worse as I was doing it. And instead, I put the phone down. I went to the town green next to my house where a family I knew was there handing out free coffee and breakfast to the homeless folks on the green, and I sat with them for an hour helping them. And I walked back to my house and my spirits were lifted. In this culture where we've been told to just get ours, to just focus on yourself, to buy the latest upgrade in the iPhone, to do the thing the influencer tells you to do, we just all have to remember that we're happier when we're engaged in communion with people. And that, yes, you need to demand leaders who are going to create a culture and economy of the common good, but we can make those choices every day. You'll model behavior that others will follow, and you'll find that you are just living a more happy and fulfilled life.
I want to remind everyone that U.S. Senator Chris Murphy is going to be right here in the Los Angeles area. He'll be in conversation with our friend and colleague Alex Michelson at the Moss Theater at New Road School in Santa Monica. This event's presented by Writer's Block Tickets, and those tickets are available at Writer's Block, that's BLOC, writersblockpresents.com. The book is Crisis of the Common Good. I would say it's required reading for the moment we find ourselves in. Thank you, U.S. Senator Chris Murphy.
Thank you. Appreciate it.